Fantastic. I think we're ready, y'all. Tsega is off, but he'll be back. And because we're recording, I think everything's going to be ready to go. Hey, everyone. It's Chuck Hunt, and I am the Family Ministries pastor at Lake Avenue Church here in Pasadena, California. And welcome for all of you who are joining us from wherever you're joining us. We're excited that you're with us for this webinar calling Faith in an Anxious World. We're really looking forward to having this discussion. It's probably a discussion that's well overdue, not just in the time of COVID-19, but also prior to this. I think there's some real reasons why we need to have a conversation about anxiety and mental health in the lives of teenagers. This webinar is really directed at your fourth graders and older, but there is going to be content throughout the whole entire thing that I'm sure that anyone who's watching is going to be able to glean some things from and take from. So we're really hopeful in this conversation. Lake Avenue Parenting is here to help you become a uniquely better parent. Unique because each family is different, whether you are a single family or your cultures are different or wherever you're coming from into this space. We recognize that there's a uniqueness to how you're parenting, and we want you to be better. Because at each stage of our kids' lives, we need to be better, and we want our kids to be better, and we want our kids to know God above, so that they might fall in love with the Lord and continue to follow Him all the days of their lives. We planned this webinar a couple months ago, matter of fact, early February, before kind of the COVID-19 thing really got going, and actually pushing up the date a couple weeks in order to make sure that we got the content while we were in this time. And apparently we still have a ways to go. And so I'm grateful for the ability to bring this to you right now. Many things, including our uncertainty and our stress have contributed to the anxiety that not only you and I feel as parents, but also our kids. And I think we're going to have some great conversation over that. But even now, in the midst of whatever stressful place you came to this webinar to, I want to make sure that we proclaim that Jesus reigns. Jesus reigns over everything that you are dealing with. I don't know where you are coming from or what issues you have in your home. But I know that whether or not you had a great day or you're limping in after wrestling with your kids, trying to get them some food, that God is with you. And I want you to hear that clearly as we begin. I believe the Lord is with you and with us as we continue to parent. He reigned when we were full of joy, celebrating Him way back at Christmas time with no thought to the situation that we would be in. He reigned when we were ringing in the new year and excited for 2020 and excited for what 2020 was going to bring and the newness that brought. He reigned when fires engulfed Australia, when pain rained down, when a helicopter crashed local to us. He reigns even as we have been separated from each other, from our families, from loved ones, from care, from the ability to care for each other. He reigns right now over you, over us, and in this moment, over our uncertainty and our anxiety. He reigns over your kids. And I think that that's really, really important to know. I want you to hear Jesus' words out of John 16:32 through 33. It says this: "A time is coming, and in fact has come, when you will be scattered, each to your own home. You will leave me all alone, yet I am not alone, for my Father is with me. I have told you these things so that in me you will have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world." Jesus' words to you and I are to take heart, that He is with you. To take heart, He is for you. To take heart, He has overcome this world. I want to pray for us as we get started here. So would you join me in a brief word of prayer? Lord God, thank you for the opportunity to come to this this unique space to hear and to talk about really important things. Important things because they're your children that we're talking about. They're ours, but they're yours. And God, we recognize that each one of our kids is a precious gift, a gift that you continue to love even more than we do, which is sometimes a little bit unfathomable. God, teach us, allow us all to hear something new and learn so that we might be the best parents that we can be. We pray it in Jesus' name. Everybody said, amen. So it may be helpful for you to know how we're going to do this and how this is going to work. We're going to have opportunities to hear 2 presentations from our panelists, and then we're going to take some time for questions afterwards. Don't worry, there are going to be some moments along the way for you to interact with the panelists so that you won't be just sitting there the whole entire time while they're talking. We designed that a little specifically so that we can get some interaction in this space. There's going to be moments for questions, as well as a poll and opportunities to comment in the chat section. And the panelists will prompt you on some of that. And you will see some things float up in the chat and whatnot. In this version of Zoom, I know you're probably really familiar with Zoom, but in this version, the webinar version, everyone is anonymous. No one can see your name unless you send a chat to all the attendees. If you do that without clicking anonymous, then your name will come up and everyone will see who you are and what's going on. The same thing is true for the Q&A box. You can send the question to the panelists, myself, Sarah, Kara, and Tsega, and we'll see it. But you can also send that anonymous to us. There's a checkbox there. You can do that. We'll go over that instruction again for you. You can send a message to myself or to Sarah during the presentations too, if you have a question or if there's a problem or a concern that you've got, and we'll try and answer and respond as well. We can do that privately to both of you. I hope that's clear and concise. I want to introduce our panelists to you as well. The first is Tsega Worku. He's a licensed marriage and family therapist since 2001. Tsega's been doing this almost 20 years. In addition to his private practice, Tsega is the director of counseling ministries here at Lake Avenue Church in Pasadena. He's also the director of the MFT Associate Training Center program called Champion Counseling Center at Faithful Central Bible Church in Inglewood. Tsega is trained to assess, diagnose, and treat couples, individuals, and families who are dealing with relationship challenges. I'm excited to have Tsega here with us. Also presenting for us is Dr. Kara Powell. Kara is the Executive Director of the Fuller Youth Institute and a faculty member at Fuller Theological Seminary. Named Christianity Today's as one of the 50 women to watch, Kara serves as a youth and family strategist for Orange and also speaks regularly at parenting and leadership conferences. Kara is the author of and co-author of a number of books, including Faith in an Anxious World, Growing With, 18 Plus, and many, many others. Both Kara and Tsega attend Lake Avenue Church with us, and I'm grateful that they've said yes to sharing their experience with us. So let me hand it over to Kara, because I'm actually really excited to hear what she has to say and to take some notes myself. So Kara, would you take it away?
Yeah, happy to, Chuck. Thanks for that great introduction. It's really an honor to be with you all tonight. Lake Avenue is such a special place for our family. My husband and I met at Lake Avenue Church, so if there was no Lake Avenue Church, I wouldn't have met and fallen in love with Dave Powell. And our kids, who are a college freshman, an 11th grader, and an 8th grader, are so involved in Lake, and we're just so grateful, Chuck, for you and the rest of the family ministry team that pours into our kids and trains volunteers to do the same. So I'm going to share for about 20 minutes, and I welcome your questions and your reflections, and so please do make use of both the Q&A and the chat. And in the spirit of asking questions, I'm actually going to share my content as responses to questions that we at the Fuller Youth Institute hear all the time from parents, step-parents, grandparents, caregivers like you all. And so I want to share some of the most frequently asked questions, as well as some of our research-based answers. But we will have plenty of time to answer some of your specific questions, and so please do make use of chat and or Q&A. So here's the first question I want us to talk about is, why are we hearing so much about stress and anxiety in young people these days? I will say that as the executive director of the Full Youth Institute, I don't go a day without a leader or a parent asking me a question about anxiety, depression, suicide, stress in general. It doesn't matter where I am. I can be in Iowa, or I can be in Seattle, or I can be in Atlanta. And it's just this common hunger to understand what is happening with our young people and why it's happening. And to be honest, we as researchers, we don't totally know why it's happening, but I'll share 3 things that I think are certainly contributing to the increased stress and anxiety rates we're seeing in young people these days, and really all generations. My best understanding is about 1/3 of the US population will at some point be diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. So that means even 1/3 of us who are on this webinar, 1/3 of the people that we know at some point in their lives are going to deal with anxiety. And that's what makes this so important. So why is this happening? Again, I think I'm going to point to 3 factors. There are others, but I'm going to point to 3. The first, and this is probably the one that might leap to your mind immediately, is because of technology. Now, I love technology. If there was no technology, we couldn't be doing this right now. If there was no technology, we couldn't enjoy Lake Avenue worship on Sundays, or whenever you watch the worship service and participate in it. So I'm very pro technology, but technology creates this pressure and this fear of missing out for our kids. You know, when I went to high school, and maybe when some of you went to high school, if I missed a party on Friday night, I maybe heard about it on Monday. Well, today's teenagers, they see the party that they missed, that they were invited to, unfolding in real time in front of them on their devices. So there's kids are so aware of what other kids are doing, and often feel left out because of technology, feel pressures to project a certain image. And so it's interesting, the increased rates in mental health challenges for young people correlate roughly with 2012, which was when smartphones really became fairly ubiquitous here in the US. And so there certainly is a correlation between increased use of technology and the anxiety that we feel and that our young people feel. I know if I was a teenager right now, I would be pretty anxious, given all the technology that's for me. So that's the first thing. The second thing has to do with us as parents. And I'll look in the mirror and speak myself about my challenges as a parent, is that there's a fair amount of evidence saying that sometimes we as parents, we are quick to swoop in and we're well-intentioned, but we're often trying to protect our kids from some of the challenges that might give them some grit, some endurance. We're so well-intentioned, but we end up robbing our kids of some of those experiences that can help them weather some of those tougher storms. So parenting is certainly a factor. And there's a fantastic article just in the last week in the Atlantic, cover story actually, by Kate Julian on parenting that I highly recommend. The third thing I would say is that families are really busy. And some of the psychologists that I respect the most say that one of the best ways to cut back on anxiety is to cut back on our schedules. And that a good rule of thumb is that our young people should have 25% of their waking hours unscheduled. And there are not a lot of teenagers who have that, especially before COVID. Now teenagers tend to have more time, so they might have more discretionary or free time now, but 25% is a good rule of thumb. So those are some of the reasons that mental health has been an increased challenge for our young people even before COVID. And then if you think about what the coronavirus does, it increases the isolation, it increases the loneliness, it increases the fear. And you know, I think while there's my understanding is there's been about a 40% increase in people reaching out to mental health hotlines during this coronavirus season, so about a 40% increase. And to be honest, I think there's going to be a lot of mental health challenges when we get back to normal or pseudo-normal or whatever that is. I mean, when we're back in large gatherings, because of all that we've heard about the challenges of being in large gatherings, I think that's going to create an even new wave of anxiety for us and our young people. So those are some of the reasons that we're seeing such an increase in mental health challenges and stress and anxiety. Here's a second question we get asked is, schools are being very proactive in teaching young people how to respond to stress and anxiety. In fact, when I was talking to my kids at dinner tonight about this very webinar, our 8th grader said, oh yeah, we talk about that at school. And teachers, many of you might be teachers, you know that you're trained to know how to respond to anxiety, mental health challenges. So why should we talk about it at home or even at church? Well, there's some interesting research that suggests that only 4% of churchgoers who have lost a close friend or family member to suicide say that church leaders were aware of their loved one's struggles. So there are these, there's such a stigma about mental health challenges in the US, and maybe even especially among those of us who are followers of Jesus. And so we often keep silent about it when we need to be talking about it. I think mental health is really a crucial part of a discipleship journey, and it's part of what we should be talking about with our young people. And Tsega and I will get into some specifics about how to do that. And then I'll tell you another reason why I think it's important for churches and homes, parents, step-parents to be talking to young people about mental health is because our kids know what's going on in their friends. They often get a glimpse into the stress, the depression, the anxiety of their friends, and they don't always know what to do with that. When they know a friend is struggling, they don't know who to turn to. And so part of why it's important that we talk about mental health in our families and at church is so that kids feel like they can talk to us as parents, and those of us who are leaders in church, they can open up about either their own struggles or the struggle of friends. Chuck mentioned that we have some resources at the Fuller Youth Institute called Faith in an Anxious World. And some of the donors who funded that had a son, a teenage son, who died by suicide a few decades ago. And this teenage son did what a lot of kids do. He told a friend he was struggling. He told a friend he was struggling, but then he said, but please don't tell anybody. So that friend didn't. The young man ended up dying by suicide, and of course, devastating so many people, including the friend who had that burden. And so we want our homes to be safe places where our kids can talk about themselves as well as any struggles they see in their friends. Here's a third question that we get asked a lot. What mistakes do well-intentioned parents make in the way that they respond to their kids' stress and anxiety? So what's a common mistake that we might make as parents in the way that we respond to what we're seeing in our kids? And here's one of the most common mistakes that we see is that we as parents, we sometimes are afraid to bring up the issue of mental health at home because we're afraid we'll make it worse. That somehow if we talk about anxiety or if we mention suicide, that we're gonna plant a thought in a kid's head that they might not otherwise have. And let me just say that kids are surrounded by messaging about mental health. In fact, in the state of California, we have passed legislation. Our state passed legislation thanks to the parent of a young person who died by suicide. So that on the back of our kids' middle school and high school student ID cards is a national suicide hotline. If you get your kids' middle school or high school ID cards and turn it over, state law says that they need to have a national suicide hotline. And that's how common the topic of suicide and these kinds of stresses that we're talking about are. In fact, young people are actually often relieved, generally relieved, when they have the chance to talk about it. And so I would just encourage you to be direct, as direct as you feel comfortable, and maybe even stretch yourself to be direct with your kids. And in fact, we're gonna do a little poll here, get us all interacting. So Sarah's gonna help us do a poll, and she's already put it in the chat. So that's, or no, there we go. There's the poll. On a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being very comfortable and 5 being very uncomfortable, how comfortable do you feel talking with your kids about anxiety, stress, and even suicide? So we'll give you about 10, 15, 20 seconds or so for you to choose a number. Scale of 1 to 5. 1 is, hey, I feel pretty comfortable. And 5 is, oh, this is a challenge for me. I'm not very good at it, and I'm afraid I'll say the wrong thing. Where do you fall in that? So we'll give you a few seconds. Hopefully you can reach your keyboard or some part of your tablet and click something. And it is an anonymous poll. So some of you are answering in chat, and that's great. But if you answer on the poll, we won't know who you are. Nobody will know who you are. And so we really want you to be as honest as you possibly can in that poll. So we'll give you a few more seconds to vote. And then Sarah, do you somehow reveal where we all landed? I'm thinking that's the case. So the poll's been removed. So, oh, look at this. Okay, wonderful. So you can see from the poll results that number 2 was where the majority, or the most common answer of the 5. So on a scale of 1 to 5, some of you are a 1, more of you are a 2, fewer again are 3, fewer still a 4, and fewer still a 5. So that's encouraging that so many of you are in the 1 or 2 box. And for those of you who are in the 3, 4, or 5, this is why we're having this webinar, because we want you to feel more comfortable as a result of this webinar. And Chuck's going to give you some other resources that you can use, because we want everybody to be at a 1 or a 2 if possible. And I'll say, in this COVID era, it was about a week and a half ago where there was just this 24-hour period where I had so many people ask me about suicide, and I heard about multiple suicides across our country. Child of a pastor, teenager of a pastor who died by suicide. And I was just so burdened by it that night, as Dave and I tucked in our kids, we still tuck them in, even though they stay up later than us. But as we tucked in our kids one at a time, we looked at them in the eye, and we were really direct with them. We said, you know what, in this COVID era, this is a time where often people feel more lonely. And in fact, we've heard, even just in these last 24 hours, about a number of suicides. How are you doing? Please know that you can talk to us about anything. And we just needed to have that conversation with each of our kids. There was no sign of any mental health problem, no evident sign, but we just thought we need to touch base with our kids. And so that might be a great action step in the next week or so. It doesn't have to be right at 8:35 when this webinar ends. Look for a good opportunity to have a heart-to-heart with your kids. A lot of us as parents, we think about the talk as the talk we have with our kids, hopefully the series of talks we have with our kids about sex. And what we think at Fuller is we need to have a whole second lane of talks these days as parents, and that's about mental health. So we talk with our kids about sex, we talk with our kids about mental health. Those are 2 of the conversations we need to keep having at home. So here's a 4th question that we get asked, especially by followers of Jesus. Why doesn't simply talking to our kids about Philippians 4, 6-7 and being anxious about nothing work? Why is that not enough? Let me just say, I love the Bible, and Philippians 4, 6-7 has been a very meaningful verse for me, and I often recommend it to people of all ages. So I am all for marinating in Scripture and letting Scripture permeate my thoughts and your thoughts and our kids' thoughts. And sometimes meditating on Scripture, that is barely adequate or totally adequate in bringing stability and sustainability to a kid. But let me just say, that doesn't work all the time, and that doesn't work for everyone. One of the things that I've come to understand is that the brain is an organ, and some of us and some of our kids and some of the people that we know, our brains are just a little bit neurologically are not totally as healthy as possible. And so that's why we have medicine. Just like somebody takes medicine for their kidneys or for their heart, some people need to take medicine in order to normalize their brain chemistry. And so, so I'm all for meditating and memorizing on scripture and worship, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. But just know that there are many folks who need even more intervention than that. So my last question that I'm going to share is this, that I'm going to try to answer is, if you were talking directly with a 16-year-old who is dealing with anxiety, what would you do and say? So I would say over the last year and a half, we at the Fuller Youth Institute, we had talked to so many therapists, great people like Tsega, and we've talked to mental health professionals, we've talked to theologians, we've talked to Bible scholars about mental health. And as I was looking over all these notes and all these interviews, and I started jotting down like what's ultimately most important for us as parents when we want to talk with our kid, I actually realized that there are 5 steps that I would recommend, and they actually spell out A, B, C, D, E. Now, I'm normally pretty skeptical of something that spells out like that, but honestly, this actually works pretty organically. That this is what therapists have told us are some really good steps to take, especially before and during any professional intervention that's needed. So here's the first step, and this will help you talk with your kid about stress and anxiety, and it's this. Ask, that's the A, ask your young person to rate their anxiety on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the worst. And so that just helps a young person, or really anybody of any age, but we're talking about young people, kind of analyze and give a quick gauge as to how they're doing. If a young person's at a 1 to 3, then that's no big deal. If the young person's at a 4 or 5, then that's handleable. It's when they're at a 6 or above, and thanks, Chuck, for adding into chat. It's when they're at a 6 or above that you want to think, what kind of resources do I maybe need to involve? What kind of other people do I need to involve? Whether it's friends, whether it's a small group leader, a pastor, a therapist like Tsega. So that's an important first question. And sometimes young people, they can't even really articulate where they're at. And so if that's the case with your young person, you might say, well, it seems to me like if there was a scale of 10, maybe do you think you're at about a 6? I mean, give them a number and they can then respond to that. But so ask your young person to rate their anxiety on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the worst. And that gives you really important data. The second step that, like I said, starts with B, is next, encourage your young person to breathe deeply. Now, my whole life, I've heard the importance of breathing deeply, but I never really understood why that was a good thing to do until we did this research in the last year. And that's when I came to understand that, that when any of us panic, our heart begins to beat faster. Like that's our, our physiological reaction to adrenaline, to that flight or fight reaction. It's like our heart's automatic gas pedal that gets oxygen to all of our extremities. Now, we can counter that. This is like God's brake pedal. We can counter that by breathing deeply so our heart gets more oxygen, doesn't have to work as hard. As our heart rate decreases, our brain gets the message that we're out of danger and everything calms down. So breathing deeply when somebody's feeling anxious is actually a really good practice to make a habit of. So then move to the third step, and that starts with C. And third is help your young person center on a helpful truth or phrase. What's a helpful truth or phrase that can be a theological anchor to your young person? Our family, our kids' whole lives, really, we've used the phrase Emmanuel, God is with us. Chuck mentioned that in his introductory comments. God's with us in all times. God's with us in all seasons. God's with us in all emotions. And so if one of our kids is getting ready to do something tough, challenging, I know is a stretch for them, I often text them and say, Emmanuel, God's with you, praying for you. That's a theological anchor for our family. I know teenagers who, when they get anxious, they cling to certain worship songs. There's certain worship lyrics that help really calm them down. It could be Psalm 23. I mean, what's important is that it's meaningful to the young person. So that's a good exercise for us to do as parents, is to talk with our kids at some point about, if you're anxious, what would help you calm down? What scripture, what aspect of God would help you calm down? And we're actually going to do a little chat exercise here. This is a little harder than ranking on 1 to 5, but we've been together now for 31 minutes, so we hopefully can do this. What truth or scripture verse do you think might be helpful for your young person? Is there a scripture verse that is maybe meaningful to you that you think could be meaningful to them? Is there a worship lyric that is very calming to you and might have the same effect on them? What theological anchor, what truth about God might be something that you can center on? And so we'll give a few moments for you to think about that. I already mentioned that ours in our family is Emmanuel. A wonderful answer. The song Jesus Loves Me. Absolutely. Like, what a fundamental, powerful truth that we need to be reminded of at all ages. So God's attributes, that God is a shepherd. Oh, yeah, so powerful. That he's a fortress. That might be meaningful to some young people, knowing that God's that strong fortress. God is solid ground that we can walk on. Really, really well said. The song Stars by the Christian group Skillet. I don't even know that one, but I'm going to make a note. Stars by Skillet. Thank you very much for giving me that little insight. Be still and know that I am God. Yes, breathing in and out, in the nose, out the mouth, from deep in their belly. Yeah, absolutely. Being still and knowing that God is God, and we can rest in that wonderful truth from the Psalms. Jeremiah 29:11. That's wonderful. Philippians 4:8. Whatever is true, whatever is just, whatever is noble. I might be a little off on those adjectives, but yes, that's a great passage. Another song from Kanye, Father I Stretch. My daughter connects with that song. That's wonderful that you already can think of a song that would be meaningful to your daughter. Just the idea of being kind to yourself, that phrase could be helpful. Oh, Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. Excellent, excellent, excellent. So feel free to keep chatting in any truth about God or song lyric that you think might be a helpful centering phrase for your young person. And then the fourth step starts with D, and that is develop a team. Okay, so we've asked, we've breathed, we've centered. Now we need to not go through this alone. We need to develop a team. I often, if one of my kids is anxious about something, and let's say that it's a place that they're going, I think with them ahead of time about, well, who's a friend that you could talk to if you started feeling anxious, when you were at volleyball practice, or when you're at a camp, or when you're somewhere, who's somebody you could talk to, who's an adult you can talk to. Help kids think about who are some safe people that they can maybe even get to give a heads up that, hey, this is a little hard for me. I might come to you if I'm feeling a little bit anxious. And again, this is a wonderful opportunity to think about, do I need to reach out to a professionally trained therapist? Would that help and support be meaningful to the young person? And then lastly, throughout our conversations, how can we empathize with our young people and really empower them? So that's kind of 2 E's, but empathize and empower. Lisa D'Amour has done some wonderful work on anxiety, especially anxiety in teenage girls, but what she says is just as relevant for teenage boys. She has this great phrase that I encourage you to add to your parenting toolkit. It's this: that stinks, and I think you can handle it. That stinks, and I think you can handle it. There's that empathy, like, oh, wow, that is going to be hard. I would be disappointed too. You know what? With all those AP tests, and now you're doing it at home, I'd be anxious about that too. College, whatever it is, yeah, boy, I'd be anxious too. That is really hard. We empathize, and we want to help our young people know that we think they can handle it. We're there for them to help them handle it. So, wow, that's really tough. I think you can handle it, but what can I do to help you? Or I think you can handle it, but let's think together about what would be a good next step, so that you're giving that young person the sense that you're with them, but they also have agency and can move forward. So that's the ABCDEs of that we've kind of synthesized from talking with a bunch of amazing therapists and mental health professionals. So Chuck, I want to turn it back to you.
Kara, thank you so much. That's super helpful. I definitely wrote some things down. I want to want to ask Tsega. One of the things that I heard Kara say was that there's moments where we as parents want to engage, but we're afraid that we're going to make it worse. And I know that's true in some of the circles that I walk in terms of walking with parents and just the nervousness of approaching some volatile situations. I don't know what you would say to that. Like, how would you respond to that reality, Tsega?
Sure. Actually, there's a list of facts and myths when it comes to suicide. There's a whole list of things that you can Google and find out. And one of the major ones is talking to anyone about suicide will make them more suicidal is one of the biggest myths that is out there. It actually takes the sting out of it. It actually makes it something that can be talked about, because one time or another, a lot of kids have at least thought about it in some fashion. And having a suicidal thought does not mean they are suicidal. There's a lot of steps that they go through before they actually become suicidal. So yeah, that is very true. Talking about it does not make it or make anyone, especially children, more suicidal.
Yeah, that's great. Tsega, what stood out to you with Kara's presentation?
I just love the Fuller Youth Institute because so much of what they're telling us is backed up with research. It's not just some different ideas that people come up with. I remember a few years ago, Kara talked to Club 45 when one of my daughters were there. And one of the things that she said, I remember, was knowing how busy this life can be when you have kids at that age with all the activities. One thing she said was, if it's a maybe on your calendar, it should be a no. It really stuck with me. I didn't use it as much. I wish I did more. But now we're experiencing that because with COVID, we have no choice. We have to say no to so many things on our calendar, which opened up opportunity to connect with our children and our family members. So I really respect what you guys have to offer, and I hope we keep learning as we go.
Yeah, that's great. So Kara, a couple more questions that stood out that I think are really helpful. So what do you wish that parents of teenagers would do when their child is dealing with anxiety?
Yeah, well, largely the ABCDEs that I talked about. If there's one other thing that I think is important for parents to know, in addition to that, it would also be from the research of Lisa D'Amour, and she says that a young person who's dealing with a lot of emotions is kind of like a glitter globe with the glitter all swirling. And we need to be empathetic and present with that young person, but a lot of times we as parents, we rush in and try to problem solve, and that glitter is still swirling for that young person. And until the glitter settles, that's her phrase, let the glitter settle, it's too early to really move into problem solving. That's a good tip in marriage. That's a good tip kind of across the board is, know the right time to kind of step in and problem solve. And I think, again, we parents, we're so well-intentioned. We're trying to be helpful, but we need to let that glitter settle a little bit. Still be present with our kid for sure, but know the right time to really step in with some next steps.
That's a great thought. And the anticipation that the glitter actually does settle is something that's comforting, right? It's like, oh my gosh, the glitter will settle. It's going to happen. We just have to wait for the right timing.
Or even settle a little bit. I mean, I think because for some kids, they're going to need, it'll be a process for that glitter to settle. But when is there enough calm that we can have a more meaningful conversation?
Yeah, that's great. I know you have more resources, and I'm going to actually just put up your website again. So Fuller Youth Institute /Anxious World. I really suggest that you guys go there. There's a couple other pieces. They put together a podcast, 4-part series. If you go to that link and then scroll all the way down, it's at the bottom of the page, you can find the link to the iTunes Connect there. And get more information about this and what Fuller is thinking and what Fuller Youth Institute is thinking and trying to help parents engage with their teams. I want to turn it over now to Tsega because Tsega's been patiently waiting, but Tsega's got some great things for us to hear as well. And just kick it over to you, Tsega.
All right, thanks, Chuck. Thanks again for putting me on this panel. I really appreciate it. It's great to be part of this unexpected God's family. I really enjoy working at Lake, and my family basically lives there because we got married there. We were there. I'm there every day of the week, or literally except for a Saturday, and my kids participate. So I'm really grateful to be part of this unexpected God's family. So there's so much that we can talk about, but I'm just going to go briefly on some of the stuff. I just want you to know I'm speaking as a therapist, and I'm not here to give advice. I'm here to really challenge you and kind of to make you think a little bit differently, or at least to build on what you already have coming into this parenting time, especially with the crisis that we're dealing with around the world. So the stress and anxiety definitely are two big issues that most of our children are dealing with, and ourselves as well. Nobody is really spared from this. But just know that stress and anxiety by themselves are not necessarily bad things. These are part of life. We have to learn how to handle them. We actually have to be good in handling stress and anxiety to be more successful. What we're talking about is when stress is too much, it becomes chronic stress, and that's when it becomes diagnosable. Or anxiety gets so out of proportion that it's not allowing us to function in our day-to-day life. That's what we're talking about. So the difference between the two. So stress is more a response to something on the outside happening to us. It could be a crisis that we're dealing with right now. It could be relational issues. So this is like a real life stuff that we're dealing with that we have to overcome or deal with. So a certain amount of stress is actually good for us. It actually makes us work harder, get to that optimal level of stress will make us better in athletics and accomplishing tasks and goals. So it's a good thing. So we need a certain amount of stress in our life to function well. But when that stress gets a little bit too much, when it becomes chronic, that's when it becomes diagnosable, and it shows up as different kind of, like PTSD, different kind of diagnoses. That's when it becomes a problem. So our view of stress has to be appropriate. It's not always a bad thing. It's just how we handle it. So in general, stress is a response to an external event, something happening from the outside, and that we can build resilience in it. But when we can't, it really is taxing. It actually feeds into anxiety disorders and actually affects us physically, emotionally, and in many different ways. So it needs to be managed, but it's not all bad. So kids, different depending on their stage of life, they have to learn how to handle their stress. When it comes to anxiety, or actually we're talking about stress, one of the ways to deal with stress is to change our mindset. Sometimes how we view certain situation can affect how we handle that stressful situation. I saw an article this week, a couple of days ago, Mary Sue shared on Facebook, and it talked about this idea about we're all in the same boat. And the writer challenged that thinking and saying, no, we're not in the same boat, we're in the same storm. But the boat is different for different people, because there are some people who are really thriving right now, doing well, where others are really suffering. So part of the stress, I guess, I was dealing with personally was, how do you rejoice all the time because you know how many people are suffering, but then it's not all suffering because you hear this really great testimonies from families on how they're able to bond with one another. So that idea of it's a storm, everybody's swept in it, the whole world, but it does not mean we are on the same boat. There are different kind of boats that we're in. When it comes to parenting, I guess for me it becomes, so what kind of boat are we coming into this crisis with? Some families are well anchored. I don't want to put you on the spot, Kara, but I think you're one of those families that I feel like because of what you do day in and day out, that you are in a better boat as a parent than, let's say, a parent who never had a chance to really work with their kids in their relationship. So just be aware of that. And it's not only what's happening to us, it's what kind of boat that we're going in that also can make a difference. Coping strategies can be positive or negative. The positive ones, you all know about the sleep and the diet and exercise and having healthy social life. But then there are also negative coping skills. Those are some of the stuff that Kara mentioned with too much internet, excessive amount of news, the drinking and the smoking. Those kind of coping skills affects everybody in a negative way. It actually makes the situation worse. And when we deal with, when we're talking about coping strategies, I want you to know there are two different, so I don't want you to be confused. There are two different ways of handling it. One is that's problem focused, meaning you want to get to the root cause of the problem and actually address that. Whereas the other one is the emotional focused. So you're trying to survive. You're trying to deal with the emotion. It's more like taking that edge off so the person can survive. But at the end of the day, you want to deal with the underneath the root cause of the stress source. So those are two things to think about. And I hope Chuck will put some of those on the chat window there. The other one is anxiety. So we say that stress is something external that's putting pressure on us, and anxiety is an internal response to either a real life event that we're dealing with, or it could be imagined. Anxiety, just like stress, is also very common. It's normal. We need certain amount of anxiety to be prepared to protect ourselves. But when that gets too much, it becomes an anxiety disorder. So whenever you hear the word disorder, it means that whatever that comes before it has gotten out of control. So anxiety can be so much that we cannot function in our day-to-day life because we perceive that problem to be so much bigger than what it is. And it's hard to control it. The good thing about this is it's very treatable. There's a lot of different interventions, especially with children. With not just medication, but even counseling can be very helpful. But just know that depending on the age of the kid, a certain amount of anxiety is appropriate for that stage of development, depending on what kind of environment they're in. To have anxiety about what's going to happen next year with school, that's very appropriate to deal with right now. But if that becomes so much that they cannot deal with their day-to-day stuff now, then that becomes a problem. So how do I know when an anxiety is really problematic or when it's a normal one? I would say if when the reaction is out of proportion to the situation, then that's a problem. The other one is if it hinders your ability or your child's ability to function normally in your day-to-day life. So, and I like what Kara shared about anxiety and stress with kids, so I don't want to go back into that. So stress is usually the result of external pressure. Again, anxiety keeps hanging around after even the problem is resolved, and it becomes needless worry. And that's another way to see the difference between the two. The other topic that I want to talk to you about is self-care. We've talked about this for quite a while, self-awareness. We've heard a lot of sermons. Why is that so important? I think when as parents, we can be so good at looking at our kids and analyzing them, but we forget that we are also part of that picture. If we don't have that self-awareness about our own anxiety and fears, we unintentionally can put that on the children. My best examples with Jesus is on Luke 6:31. It says, do to others as you would have them do to you. So the assumption, the implication in here is you're already taking care of yourself. It doesn't say take care of yourself. It says do to others as you'd like them do to you. The other one on Mark 12:31 is love your neighbor as yourself. If I don't love myself, if I don't take care of myself, how can I play that out? So there's an assumption in the Bible that we are taking care of ourselves. Just because it doesn't point it out does not mean we shouldn't. And the last one is on Mark 1:35. It says, very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. I feel like this is a beautiful image of self-care, that he separated himself. He needed to take care of himself, spiritually connect with his Father before he comes back and connect. So we have a lot of examples in the Bible regarding self-care. And when we talk about self-care, there is spiritual, physical, psychological, and emotional self-care. So as a family, I think this is a good time to sit down and take a look at it and with your family members and kind of check on each other. How do we take care of ourselves? Sometimes it could be going for a walk. Yes, it helps us physically, but are we intentionally doing it as a self-care? Or even asking each other questions like, what is it that one thing you did today to take care of yourself? So that kids will be very aware of themselves, that this is something that they can do. Self-care for them so far, they didn't have to think about it. They eat their breakfast, their lunch is packed, they go to school, just going from class to class, PE class. All that was part of a healthy lifestyle, but it wasn't something they're very intentional about. Some kids, their sports activity have been pulled away from them, which really affects them in a negative way. So to bring it into their picture, into their awareness, and saying that used to be your self-care, you never thought about it, but now we need to replace it with something different. The other one is communication. I think when we talk about communication, people have different ideas. Communication is not talking. Anybody can talk, but that does not mean we are communicating. Actually, it's difficult not to communicate. We cannot not communicate, because even when we don't talk, we're still sending messages. So there are verbal, non-verbal, written communications we can have. But I think in communication, one point I would like to leave you with today is to say, understanding comes before agreeing or disagreeing. Whatever the topic is, the first thing should be understanding. The only way we know that we've understood the person is to ask them and say, so did I get you right? Can you tell me more? What do you mean? Before we say yes or no, or whatever the decision is. If we don't understand, it's better to understand each other and disagree than to agree without any understanding, because that's just a matter of time until it blows up. So I really want to emphasize that understanding is really important. And those are simple questions. Tell me more. What do you mean? Let me see if I get you right. Even if it's a simple issue with even younger kids, to help them really hear themselves as you repeat it back to them. And I love the scaling question as Kara asked us today, because what's going on in your life sometimes can be too general and it's difficult to express it. But if you give them a number system from 1 to 5, this is what you already have defined what that means, and asking how was your day, it makes it so much more easier to give you that number, so you can decide whether to follow up with them later or not. So scaling numbers, scaling questions are very helpful. So this COVID-19 experience, how does it affect teens and preteens? I think it's huge. I think we will find out in the future. Somebody asked a question on this panel or on this list about the future effects of this crisis that we're going through with kids. Honestly speaking, we don't know. We really don't. We're going to find out. We're going to have to deal with it as it comes. But one thing we can do is work on the boat now. Work on our boat now. Let's not wait till they're really in crisis and figure out what to do then. If we really take our spiritual, physical, psychological, and our social life, make it healthy enough so that whatever that is that's coming down the line will be a whole lot better to handle it. We cannot shelter them from everything. Actually, they do need to experience and deal with stress and anxiety, as I told you earlier, so they can be more equipped. But in terms of what the future holds, we have our faith in God, but we cannot say anything about it now. The other one is developmentally. This is the stage when they are experiencing many new things. Teenagers, this is when they develop their identity. They go out and try so many new things. And that's why sometimes they get so moody and so difficult for them. Now you add this whole new thing that nobody else has experienced. It makes it that much more challenging. So we need to be patient with them. We need to really negotiate with them and work with them as they navigate this time. But we need to take care of ourselves. We cannot be there for them or help them if we don't take care of ourselves. And lastly, it's about loss. There's a lot of stuff that we've lost during this process. We've lost a normalcy of our day-to-day life, freedom to go anywhere we want, sense of security about the future. For some people, jobs, loved ones, they've lost actual loved ones in their families, or our own personal health can be compromised, not just with the COVID, but with all the side effects of it, which is stressful and a lot of other things. So there is a lot of loss. So with loss, there comes also grieving. And as we grieve differently. At different stage of life, people grieve differently. For children, when they grieve, their number one concern is not just missing that person, but their existence is in question. If dad dies, they're not just thinking about where did dad go, how's he doing, is he in heaven? They want to know that mom's not going to die. They want to know that I'm okay. And it's very appropriate at that age for them to be comforted, let them know what the plan is if anything happens to our family. I like what Kara said about having a team to really let them know that it's not just you that are going to take care of them. There's a whole bunch of extended family members and whatever you need to do. And the older they are, they actually need to see that things are actually in place if an event, a disaster happens, so that they can feel calm enough and be able to go through their day-to-day life. And the last thing is, in terms of therapy, that's the question. I know therapy is kind of an artificial way of creating a very safe space for people to explore and express their thoughts and feelings. Sometimes that's difficult to do outside, so therapy can be a good support in that way. When we're in crisis, of course, that's when a lot of people go to therapy. But I want to tell you, it should not be. We should consider it, at least be comfortable with it. The children need to be at least aware of it, that if they need it, that they can go to. And the sooner people come to therapy, the more better outcome there is. When we wait so long, by the time they come to therapy, just the collateral damage can take a toll and very difficult to deal with. So yeah, you should consider it. It's very helpful, but it's work on your end to really encourage them. Actually, we recommend parents to be in therapy than even children, because the more stronger you are as a team, the more self-aware you are, the better parent you can become and actually be more successful in this journey. So I'll end it with that, teacher.
That's great, Tsega. I really appreciate the way that you kind of walked us through all of those pieces, especially through the communication piece, the loss piece. I think those are some really important pieces. And I guess, Kara, I want to ask you a question about something that I heard kind of at the very beginning of what Tsega was saying about the resilience, kind of building resilience in the midst of stress, or building resilience towards stress. And I feel like at some level, like, yes, we need to do that, but man, is it a fine line between building resilience and realizing when that stress is too much. I don't know if you had seen anything in your research or any conversations that you had that may speak to the kind of resilience and the stress.
Yeah, great question, Chuck, and I'll get the ball rolling, but I'd love for Tsega to comment also. I love being on this panel with a therapist because Tsega has a lot more training than me in this. So I look forward to hearing his answer too. When I think of resilience, I think about how God often works through our challenges to develop those resilient muscles. And one of my colleagues and friends at Fuller, Scott Cormode, who is a parent of two, says this, and I think it's so true. He says, as parents, we want to protect our kids from all pain and suffering. Like, we just want that. I want to protect all kids from pain and suffering, but especially our 3 kids, I want to protect from pain and suffering. And yet that's one truth. And then the second truth is, as a parent, I also want my child to have the kind of grit and resilience and character that only comes from walking through suffering. And that was one of the really interesting pieces in this recent article in The Atlantic about how we as parents, when we see our kids in distress, we swoop in and try to rescue them. And sometimes we need to. Sometimes distress is severe enough that that's absolutely what we need to do. And yet there are other times where that empowering empathy, boy, that's really hard. What can we do together so you can handle this? Is actually a better or preferred response. So, when I think of resilience, I think about just the way that God develops that through some hard times. And as a parent, sometimes we need to just let our kid have just a little bit of space to work through it, especially if that scale of 1 to 10, they're at a 5 or a less. Again, if it's a 6 or more, that's when you need to respond more proactively.
That's a great point. You got to be in communication with your kid in order to understand where they are in the midst of resilience and whether or not they can handle that. That's great. What did you hear out of Tsega's presentation that really struck you, or things that you want to be remembering and take away?
Yeah, well, like I said, I was taking notes. I put that in the chat. Tsega, you answered really well a question that is sometimes hard for me to answer, which is, what's the difference between kind of normal adolescent angst and challenge, and when there's a more significant problem? And what I wrote down that you said is when there's abnormal functioning or abnormal reactions. When your child is reacting in a way that doesn't feel like them, that's a possible sign, as well as if their function level is just different. So I'm going to be quoting you to other people, because those are two really helpful benchmarks to keep an eye out for.
That's great. That's great. Love that. So I guess, Tsega, the question that I think I have for you is, I know you have a high school senior. How are you guys walking through this? How does a therapist do this? I wish I had that knowledge in the back of my head, but I wanted to put that out to you. How are you guys walking through this?
Yeah. If you know what I know, you know it's not really. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't work at home with your own kids. It's only when people are desperate and when they're paying you, somehow they listen to you. So at home, you're still a parent. And it's a very good question because, I have a senior who's graduating this year, but everything is new to a point where we don't even know how to relate to her or even talk about it, because it's just, she doesn't even know for how long this is going to go on. So as I was preparing for today's webinar, it made me really think how much, those articles that Kara mentioned on the Atlantic. It's just amazing articles, really great articles. I encourage everybody to read them. I actually contacted a therapist today saying, you know what? I don't have to wait till something goes wrong for her to build that relationship. So what I've done is we do everything we can as a family at home and talk to her, make her as comfortable as possible. We still have expectations, but also start building a relationship with a person, with another therapist professional that, she can see them she can see her every few weeks. But eventually, if I need to, I already know she has that relationship with that person. And I like what Kara said in terms of the team. And I think that would be something I'll be working on now and saying, okay, who are the team members that are going to really walk with her during this time of her life? These things do exist in our surrounding. We just don't think about them or don't give them time. So that's some of the ways. But just because you're a therapist, I just want you to know, Chuck, it doesn't mean you listened any more than.
Yeah, and it doesn't work just as because I've been a youth pastor for many years that translates all the time either.
But one thing I want to kind of piggyback on regarding resiliency, I want to say it's been done. Some research has been done, and I need to go back and look at it. But I know that the only predictor there is out there about success of children is resiliency. Resilient children are the ones you can tell. There are a lot of other factors, but resiliency is one of those things. Kids who don't just fall and stay there, who just keep getting up, you can pretty much know that this kid is going to be successful in one way or another, whatever it looks like. But that's the only predictor of success with children is resiliency. Yeah.
That's great. One of the things you just said was about kind of the idea that expanding our resources for our kids, right? Expanding that community for our kids and making sure that they have enough people surrounding them. And that was what Kara was talking about. And I think in this time of COVID-19, I feel like we have lost immediate access to that community, whether that's teachers or coaches or people that are out there. Even youth pastors seem a little bit further distant. And I guess my question for that is how effective is like teletherapy in those spaces when we're kind of still in those distant spaces? And what does that look like, Tsega?
Yeah. So teletherapy includes either on the phone or on Zoom. And just like what we're doing right now, I think we have experienced enough now that we know it's not perfect, but it's not as bad as people thought it was. It's a great way to connect. And in therapy, actually, after the first couple of sessions, I'm seeing that people are much more comfortable using this medium than coming into your office. It cuts on driving time. It's they're in their comfort zone. And once they get into the work, it gets really much, much easier. So I would say trying it might be hard in the initial 1 or 2 sessions, but after that, it's very, very effective. And people are willing to cut on their fees because it works on both ends. Now it gives you even bigger reach. It could be in Santa Monica or Northern California. If you find the right therapist, you don't have to go there. So it really brings resources even closer to us than it was before. You're not limited to the time and place. Now it's much more available. So I would really encourage people to give it a try.
And
yes,
great answer, Tsega. And Chuck, if I can just add something, you hit on an important reality for young people right now is that our kids are in school online now. And so they're having regular interaction with peers and with adults Monday through Friday. I'm actually pretty concerned about what the summer is going to mean for teenagers' mental health, because I think kids are going to be a lot more bored. We don't know what activities are going to resume and what's still going to be on hold. But there's a lot of kids who those adult teachers are really a lifeline for them. And so I think we as parents, we need to be even more vigilant the longer this lasts. And when our kids are listless and, and those kind of signs that they're not quite being themselves or not having the social stimulation, that's something to pay attention to and think with our kids about, well, what can you do? How can you volunteer? How can you connect with friends? And for every kid, it's different. Our three kids connect with friends differently. One's on the phone, one is FaceTiming. They do it in different ways, but to help our kids figure out what works for them to stay in those networks of peers and adults that are lifelines in this time.
Yeah, those are great. So, y'all, you have heard a lot so far. You guys have been on for a while, and this is great. But we wanted to make sure that we got to your questions specifically, and you guys have heard plenty about kind of the reality of anxiety for kids right now, the reality of their mental health state, some helps for you all, but also I realize that some of this may not be answering the specific questions that you may or may not have. We already have one, and I'm going to start now. But if you want to, just pop into the Q&A portion and send your question to us, and we'll try and get to it. There's two ways we're going to either get to it. We're going to get to it live, or we're going to try and respond to it by typing. So fire away your questions if you've got, and then we'll continue. But the question that we got was, are there any tips on theological anchors when kids are not wanting rib for that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's a real question for many of our teenagers who have grown a little bit distant in their relationship with God. So a saying that involves God is going to be less appealing to them. We're created in God's image. And so if you're a young person, for them to remember something or hold on to a truth about who they are, even if they don't mention God, that's still part of how God's created us. So again, it's thinking with your young person, what is a quality that you want to remember about yourself? I can handle this. I can get through today. Any of those things are, ideally would involve God somehow, but if that just isn't going to work with your young person, then think with them about what would be a sentence, a song lyric, a reminder that would be that rock that they can stand on.
That's great. One of the things that I have noted in my time as youth pastor has been the reality that God's truth is everywhere, and specifically it's so prevalent in our pop culture. And I think if you're just listening with an acute ear to what God's saying, even in the midst of other things, I think we can find the things that God's saying to our kids. So I think it was mentioned earlier in the chat, Kanye West's song is something that anchors. And I think Kanye has some incredible lyrics that point to Jesus, even though sometimes his lifestyle absolutely doesn't.
That's a whole other webinar.
That's a completely other webinar. But I have used that and pointed kids to Jesus. And so some of that is, listening to what your kids are listening to, paying attention to the shows and other things that they're paying attention to, and hearing, is God in that space? Our family now is watching The Good Place, and it's just a fun little trip to kind of think about and talk about and philosophize about, and yet at the same time try and anchor ourselves into what is Jesus doing. So there are definitely anchors out there, and I think we've got to be listening for them in significant ways. I think we'll want to answer this one live. How do I know that my kid isn't experiencing spiritual warfare with anxiety and or depression? Tsega, do you have a thought about that?
Yeah, that's a tough question. That's a question that requires a lot of discernment. It's not just a counseling question. that dealing with anxiety, as you said, if you sense there's a spiritual component in there, I would say you need to reach out to your spiritual leaders, your pastors, to really talk about it. And there are people with gifts of discernment. They can actually tell the difference. And I think having a collaborative talk with your therapist, if they're Christian especially, can be very helpful. So we don't necessarily have to see it as a black and white, that both can be addressed in a collaborative way. It's just like any medical condition, you know, the therapist has to work with a psychiatrist or with a medical doctor. So if it's a spiritual issue, I would say there needs to be more collaboration involving a person who has the gift of discernment. Yeah.
Karen, any thoughts?
That was very well said, Tsega. I do pray Ephesians 6 for myself and my kids periodically. And I love that passage that Paul gives us in the spiritual armor, the belt of truth, the breastplate of righteousness, the shield of faith, the sword, which is the word of God, the helmet of salvation, and our feet fitted in the gospel of peace. I think I nailed them all. But that passage is so meaningful to me that I have memorized all that. I've prayed it that much. So I certainly do pray that for myself and for my kids when I feel like there are satanic forces involved or the enemy somehow trying to distract my kids. But Tsega, you said so well, like as we're doing that, we can also pursue other help. So we can also pursue, just like I pray for healing for people while those people are seeing doctors, I can pray Ephesians 6 over my kids while my child is perhaps seeing a therapist or a professional, whatever it might be. So I would view it as both and to really be thinking holistically and responding holistically.
Great. That sounds like both of you have a similar response, and I'll leave that there. Saying an important question. Can you speak about what kind of counseling services are available at LEC for our kids, and what the process is to get them started?
Yeah. So what we try to do is to be a resource for the community, especially for the church members. So what we do is, if somebody calls us for counseling, we talk to them over the phone and kind of assess where their situation is. If it's a family that has resources and they just need to be pointed to place, or they may have insurance and they just don't know how to go about navigating through their insurance, then we try to help them, connect them with already existing licensed therapists out in the community. But we always have people who either they don't have access to it or they just don't feel comfortable going outside yet. So what we have at Lake is we have marriage and family therapy therapists, trainees from Fuller Seminary and APU. This is kind of their first experience, but they're quality counselors. So we offer up to 10 to 12 sessions, very low fee, to help address that initial stage. So it's kind of a process that we have to go through as we go through this whole counseling process. So this becomes a first step into either just stabilizing and going back to the regular life or to do more. It's very difficult to find therapists who work with children for many reasons, liability and all kinds of stuff. So as a church, we're really blessed to have Christian therapists who can at least connect with the children in a different way, or we can even have groups that we can have for more than 3-4 kids together at the same time. And now with the Zoom and the whole internet, we can even be more accessible. So we do have counselors there. We see about 70 to 80 clients a week now, and we can see more if the need is there. But one thing I just want to say is we just don't want to be a clinic. We're not competing with anybody else. So we don't advertise too much because already we get in, it's a word of mouth share. But the sad part is people within our community don't even take advantage of it. So those who have are really grateful for it. So it is there, it's yours, you use it. And like I said, you don't have to be in crisis. Just even for especially the teenagers, before they go out into college, to say, I've been to therapy. I know how to sit and talk to someone over Zoom or in person 3-4 times. So we want to be a resource to help you connect with other existing resources in this area, plus offer a limited amount of therapy there on site.
Great, thank you. That's super helpful.
Sure, and the way it works is called the intake line number. It's a confidential number. It's 626-844-4794. And all you have to do is just leave your message with your name, phone number, and that you're looking for counseling. So we call you back and then take it from there.
Great. I'm perfect. Sarah's already put that number up so that you guys can see it. It's also higher in the chat too, along with the website. So if you guys want to take a, you can slide back up in the chat. You can find that there.
By the
another
way,
question.
Can I say one more thing? If you actually go to the Lakes Counseling website, we actually have other therapists in the area that have relationship with Lake listed on there. So you can actually go to their websites and see what kind of specialty they have, what their fee is, all kinds of stuff. So use that resource for yourself or for other people.
Great. I'll post both of those in just a second. Another question. I sometimes feel scared that I don't have the temperament or personality to help with my particular child's needs. It makes me fear for their well-being. Kara, is this person alone in this, or do you find that in some of the circles that you run in?
Yeah, well, I messaged Chuck separately when I saw this question on Q&A and thought, I said to him, can I please answer this question? Because I will say the area where I feel most inadequate is as a mom, hands down. And I study parenting and I have a PhD and all that, but let me just say, my job at Fuller is a piece of chocolate cake compared to parenting my kids. And I love my kids and I like my kids, but parenting is just so tough. It's definitely where I'm most prone to feel like I'm not enough, and I don't measure up. And when I feel that way, I think there's a couple ways that I try to respond. One is I do pray about it, and because I think sometimes that is a lie that I believe that I'm not enough, and I need God to kind of recorrect my vision. So take that to the Lord and really talk it through with God is so helpful for me. But then the second thing is parenting is not meant to be a solo sport. And that's why I love that we're doing this webinar. That's why I love that we have a church that's so welcoming for parents, is because, on the one hand, God's called us to parent the kids that we have. And so there's a sense that we can be adequate parents, but we also need this team. So I want to encourage you that God's giving you the kids that you have, and God knew who you were going to be and who they were going to be, and He put you all together. Whether you've adopted, whether you've fostered, whether you're step parent, whatever it might be, God's put you together. So that's wonderfully comforting. And at the same time, like, I'm so grateful for the adults who are investing in my kids, and who I can go to, who are a go-to place for me as a parent when I'm kind of working things through. Hey, how do you think I should respond? I'm really struggling with this. You know me, you know my kids. What advice would you give me? So one of the great things about being part of a church is that we can walk through the ups and downs of parenting together. So you take comfort you're through prayer, knowing that God has destined you to be the parent or step parent of this child, and at the same time you're not alone. And so reach out to the resources, even other parents, maybe even people on this webinar, people in your small group, people in your adult class, people you sit near when we sit together at 393 North Lake Avenue. Those are the kinds of resources that are so helpful.
Oh, that's really good. That's really good, Kara. I think those type of responses are reminding us that we're not alone in not only the way that we feel, but not alone just in the parenting part. I mean, the old adage, they didn't come with instruction manuals, right? And maybe we got great instruction. We got parented well, or we didn't get parented well, and we bring all of that into the ideas of parenting. And so I think that's why, for parenting ministry here at Lake, we're saying that we want to be uniquely better at the job of parenting, and continue to move that forward. I got another question about regression. One of the parents of a younger child saying that their 5-year-old has regressed in their potty training since the quarantine. And I'm wondering, Tsega, if you're not seeing a regression not only in 5-year-olds, but middle schoolers or high schoolers, and possibly even parents for that matter, just kind of figuring out like, wait a second, we settle into our training, right? What are your thoughts around that, Tsega?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I almost want to say if we don't regress a little bit during this crisis, maybe that's the problem. If somebody is not regressing at some form, because what else is going to happen? How many other pandemics have we lived through? And again, as I said earlier, it's very easy to see it in the children because we're so focused on them and we pick these things up. But trust me, we all have regressed in one form or another. We're kind of trying to find out our balance again and try to get back on. So I would keep an eye on the kid, but I would be very careful to quickly go to it's a problem that cannot be fixed. Maybe the kid needs to find some stability and then kind of gets back on track again. But as a society, we have regressed a little bit. And I think there's something normal there. I'll encourage the person to have somebody else to talk to. It doesn't have to be a therapist, but it could be another family member that can help them process it a little bit better. If there are other things going on, again, that's a good time to really look into it and say, okay, what else is going on in the kid's life? But in general, my response will be some kind of regression is expected, but bedwetting can also mean a whole lot of other stuff too. So I'll leave that for the professionals. These are things that you don't have just a quick answer to, but in general, I'm not surprised.
Cool. I'm looking at the time, and I want to respect people's time and make sure we end on time. And we've got just a few questions left, and so I just want to kind of rapid fire. First thoughts about a particular question. Kara, my child is struggling, freshman in college. Is it too late to build that resilience? How can I start?
Yeah. No, it's not too late to build resilience. It's never too late. God continues to transform us. I think life is God's curriculum to continue to spiritually form us. In terms of how you build resilience, I would start by maybe talking to your young person, talking to that college freshman. I have a college freshman, so I completely understand. Talk to that college freshman and share, hey, where does it feel like you're handling things well? And where does it feel like you're not handling things well, perhaps? Start with a positive. Let's affirm what they're doing well, and then see if they can even identify, wow, I am really struggling with keeping up on my schoolwork now that I'm in online school, or whatever it might be. And then ideally see if they can figure out a plan or a path forward. That's always the ideal. But if they can't do that, then you can make some suggestions, maybe lay out some options. If there's an adult, Dave and I have talked a number of times about like, what adult would our kids listen to who's not us? And Tsega, you named this. Sometimes our kids don't hear from us. And so is there another adult that you want to nudge and say, hey, can you reach out to my kid? I'd love for them to talk to you about that. I think it's fine for us as parents to talk to other adults about our kids. And, we're all in this together. Like High School Musical says, we're all in this together. And so those are some of the ways. Start with a conversation yourself, see what plans they can come up with. If not, who are other adults that they might listen to or might be able to brainstorm some way. So fantastic.
Tsega, a question for you. This person want to be vulnerable with my teens, but not overwhelmingly so. How can a parent share their own struggles with anxiety with their teens to hopefully normalize it?
Yeah, so I think as parents, depending on what age the child is, the younger they are, we seem to have more control and are able to answer all their questions. But as they get older, I like the Fuller Youth Institute's book on growing with, how we kind of shift from kind of guiding and telling them what to do to going next to them, and we're walking together to we kind of step back and kind of follow their lead. I would say, depending on the age, it's okay to say, I really don't know, or even to share your own anxiety. I think the more vulnerable we are, the more comfortable kids would be to talk about it. But I would say, as you mentioned, you're dealing with your own anxiety is really important. I love that passage again, when Christ got up early in the morning, took care of himself, prayed, and came back. It's a whole different posture that we have when we take care of our own fears, anxieties, so that we can walk with them without adding anything on. We don't have to fake it. We don't have to give them confidence that we don't feel. It's okay to say the reality that we don't know, but the way we say it will be different. So I would encourage you to make sure that you take care of your own anxiety and fears so that you can walk with them and be open with the children.
Awesome. When you see your kids not taking care of themselves and they don't want to listen to your advice, how do you encourage them to take care of themselves? This one to you, Kara.
Well, I've never had my kids not want to listen to my advice. I'm just kidding. Totally kidding. In fact, you know, I will say our son, who's a college freshman, he's made so many great decisions his freshman year. But there was one area where Dave and I were we wanted to talk to him about it, and we weren't sure how open he was going to be to hearing our input. And so, so this is something that I've kind of stumbled on as a parent, is when I share a concern, like I did with my son when I was visiting his school in Houston. I first said, okay, so what would you disagree with in what I just said? And I let him critique my concern. What's inaccurate or invalid about it? So start by asking, what do you disagree with? And then say, well, then maybe what do you agree with? And I'll tell you, and please don't tell my kids this, because I've used it with all three of them. Like when they start by critiquing me, then they're actually, in my opinion, then when it gets to that, well, what do you agree with? They're far more likely to say, well, I think you might be right, that blah, blah, blah. And so let them critique you a bit and then ask, but what do you agree with? And see if you can get to the point where they actually do at least admit some of the accuracy of what you're thinking.
Awesome.
I'll also add to that, Chuck, what we said earlier in terms of understanding. I think to really try to understand them well, but also to make sure that they understand what your concerns are, so that that can lead you to hopefully to an agreement. But even if you disagree, at least they understand why you're doing it. Yeah.
No, that's great. That's great. Tsega, last question. What is the path if I think my child needs medication?
So I would highly encourage you not to put kids on medication if they're not in counseling, because you need, so the reason for medication is kind of to take that edge off, depending on the diagnosis, of course, but mostly it's because things have gotten out of hand. So as you use medication to ease that sharp edges, they need to learn skills on how to cope better, so that the goal is eventually they'll be off of the medication and they can actually continue living on their own. What usually happens is when you just go for medication, and the day that they're off of that medication, they're just back to ground zero again, because they haven't grown emotionally in other ways. So if you do consider that, at least have those professionals talk. And I think counseling should be almost required to do it. Again, for the same reason that I was talking about, and not maybe the child, you can also be in there with them, family therapy or by yourself, but you want to make sure that you're building those resilient qualities, attributes in them, so that when they're off of the medication, you have a kid who's grown in many ways. If not, it kind of masks it for way too long, and then it becomes a problem. And I'm saying this, of course, depending on what issue it is and what kind of medication it is. Yeah.
No, that's helpful. That's really helpful. Thank you. So as we want to wrap up here, we just want to say thank you to Kara and to Tsega for helping us expand this discussion and helping us understand a little bit more about anxiety and mental health, especially with our kids. And as we walk as families together, trying to do this not alone. So I appreciate all of you being here. I'm super excited about that. It's been really great. I've learned a ton, so I'm going to continue to move that stuff into my life, into our lives. Please know that the family ministry staff as well is here for you. We continue to just be around, and we're trying to reach out to all of you. Know that you can reach us, or our contact information is on our website, lakeav.org/family ministries, and you can get us there. I think we'll also be sending you a follow-up email. If you registered for this event, that was part of the registration, is we want to send you a follow-up email to make sure that you have all the resources that we've been talking about and we've been putting in the chat, and there's some more there that we haven't actually even talked about that will be there. Super excited to send that to you. So know to be looking forward to that. And in that email, you'll also get a link to the recorded version of this conversation, so that you can share that with your friends and family. You can go back and watch parts and portions if you need to, so that you can hear. So again, as we close, let me pray for us, and then we'll be on our way. Lord God, thank you again for a moment here just to sit and talk about our kids, to talk about our families, to talk about what it means for us to be parents in this space. God, we just ask that you would continue to open our own eyes so that we can be caring and loving parents as we go. God, we lift all this up in your precious name. Amen. Thanks again for joining us. I hope this has been helpful for you as you try and become a uniquely better parent. Thanks again. Bye-bye.